Thank you very much. I would like to introduce to you our friend Rika Lesser, who is here with us this evening to discuss the work of Richard Howard and in particular his new book, A Progressive Education. Okay, here are some few things about our host this evening. Our hostess, Rika Lesser, a fabulous poet, a wonderful scholar, a tremendous translator, well known. We'll go through these. We're here to discuss Richard Howard, one of America's great men of letters, one of the world's great writers. His work is I'm sorry, I can't get these things to go back. Legend. He has 17 books of poetry. He has over 250 translations. He's a critic extraordinary and, of course, one of the great teachers of our time. He has a career which spans nearly half a century, 50 years. So let's start with progressive education. Rika, go ahead, get us started. How do you feel about progressive education? Do you want to read us a poem?
I was going to read two poems. I was going to read one from Talking Cures and excerpts of a long poem. I'm going to start with a poem of Richard's from Talking Cures, which was published in 2002. And I'm doing this, it's a poem called Elementary Principles at 72. I'm reading this partly because Richard's birthday was last week, and he turned 85. Elementary Principles at 72. When we consider the stars, what else can we do with them? And even recognize among them sidereal father figures. It was our consideration that arranged them so. They will always outshine us, for we change. When we behold the water, which cannot be held, for it keeps turning into itself, that is how we would move. But water overruns us. Aspire to be clad in fire, for who would not put on such apparel? The flames only passed by. It is a way they have of passing through. But earth is another matter. Ask earth to the last mother. One womb we may resume. Yes, indeed. Earth will have us.
Okay. Thank you.
I wanted to give you a rather by Richard Howard. And that was from a fairly recent book that was published in 2002. Rather than read the whole of my favorite book, my favorite poem in A Progressive Education, I'm going to read parts of it and sort of pause where I'm leaving things out.
What is your favorite
already
poem?
Seen the book, you'll know that in a moment.
Okay.
It's called, If You Can Hear Me, You Can Hear Me. The poem is called What the Future Has in Store. And you'll remember or learn that Mrs. Masters is the principal and Miss Husband is one of the teachers in the Park School. What the future has in store. Dear Mrs. Masters, the 6th grade class of Park School herewith submits our research project for the year 2000. In choosing its theme, we have attempted to follow the guidelines Miss Husband furnished, noting first of all our project's awesome date, which appears to be widely regarded as some sort of turning point in history. And second, Park School's official mandate that each project must show some relevance to life as it is actually lived on Earth. A statement not likely to faze our class, or any Park School class, even those less well endowed than our sixth graders in matters of vocabulary. Our sixth grade class has also taken this year what the office calls our hygiene concentration. Most of us prefer calling it by another name. The whole class finds it hard to believe that grown-up people voluntarily subject themselves to such senseless behavior, which Miss Husband says they must in order to produce children, and even hope to gain some form of pleasure by taking part in it. Some girls in our class, Lois Hexter and Lucy Wenzel, for instance, claim the film we were shown and the clinical vocabulary Miss Husband employed to describe what invariably goes on during SI made the whole thing seem rather disagreeable, to say the least, and sometimes really disgusting. Dear Mrs. Masters, perhaps now you can understand how, after the disturbing revelations of hygiene, our class responded not only with real enthusiasm, but also with something like hope to what amounts to an alternative view of a future free from the horrors of sexual intercourse. We gained this new vision on our field trip, as we were saying, to the reptile house of the Cleveland Zoo, which has an unusual collection of Komodo dragons there, the biggest lizards on Earth, 10 feet long, dinosaurs really, solitary creatures that associate only for mating, which their keepers report is so grim to see that they now confine each dragon in a separate cage. Here's what happens, according to eyewitness accounts. First, the male vomits to prepare himself. Then he flicks his long blue tongue at the female to judge receptivity. If she resists with her claws and teeth, he has to pin her to the ground during SI. With most livestock, it's called covering, to avoid getting hurt. The keepers told us that after SI, it takes a dragon mom 7 months to hatch her clutch of some 20 eggs, and after that, it takes 5 years for young dragons to reach maturity. Mature eating baby dragons, 10% of their diet, which have to become fast tree climbers to avoid predation, a zoo expression for not getting themselves devoured by dragon dads. We can see why zoos keep males apart from females, and therefore why it must have come as quite a surprise 2 years back for all involved when this one female went ahead and laid a clutch of fertile eggs that managed to hatch by a process called parthenogenesis, to propose this report on the future happiness of human life. Perhaps one of us in this very class will be able to relieve humanity of the burden of sexual intercourse. That is our fond hope. Signed, yours faithfully, Judy Anders, Nancy Angrish, Duncan Chu, Arthur Engelhurst, David Hammerstein, Jane McCullough, Lois Hexter, Lucy Wenzel, David McConaughey, David Stackover, Joan Sturgis, Kenneth and Jonathan Klein, Michael Hopkinson.
I think one of my favorite parts of that is the maybe we'll learn in seventh grade that no fate is worse than death after all, and that life will be our fate. I think that's just one of those amazing kinds of things. What attracts you to that poem?
The Komodo dragons. That's
Because you just happen to like the Komodo dragons, or there was something about them that you were particularly drawn to.
well, when I was very young, I don't know if I was the same age. I might have been a couple of years younger than these kids. I was very interested in science, and like any other kid, I I was interested in animals and in flowers. And when these kids, there's a lot about dinosaurs in other poems and their trip to the Museum of Natural History and learning how to balance a dragon head and tail in the model they're making back at the park school. Dinosaurs, we all kind of learn about, and especially if you've lived in New York most of your life and you've gone to the Museum of Natural History just to see the dinosaurs and the dioramas. So when Richard first read me this poem and he got to the Komodo dragons, I just flipped. They were so amazing. And as I pointed out in the introductory essay, if you read through all of Richard's work, you'll find there are all kinds of animals throughout, not just dogs.
Yeah, I appreciated that, and the other thing I think was uh, substantially interesting about the poem is although they are charming poems in the sense that they manage the voice of precocious children very effectively, so that they're never really saying things these kinds of kids don't say. Nonetheless, they take on very serious topics. They take on things like sex and death with that innocence and kind of bright naivete, not just foolish naivete, that allows people to listen to the conversation that they're having, or over, in a lot of ways, as in these, as with other poems, we're allowed to hear something, a conversation between people, a correspondence that otherwise we might not have known about, and then we go forward from there into that world of meaning, because they're not just merely entertaining poems. They're poems which actually do give us some pause to think about sex and death, peculiarities of religion, the wonderful peacocks, speaking of animals.
Well, in this poem, another class member, I think it's Anne Woby, she doesn't like the term parthenogenesis only being applied to animals because she's Catholic, obviously, and she insists that there is only one virgin birth, and we all know what that is. She doesn't sign the letter.
Well,
so that's yes, and in the poem concerns the death of a peacock, which is Arthur Engelhurst doing, I believe. It might be someone else. But there's the practice of kaparot, where Hasidic Jews take a chicken and whirl it around their heads and then sacrifice it. So that's the poem where Arthur Engelhurst kills the peacock, believing it's a vampire that he has to kill. So there are peacocks, there are chickens, there are vampires, there are.
One of the things that I thought was interesting, because we looked at that. One of the questions you asked is how is this different, or how is this the same from other work? I don't know. Can you see the picture I have on the screen now? Can you see the peacocks?
Yes, and you have one from 1974.
1974, after the facts, the Friedrich Hollerin poem, where again it's almost 40 years away, but it's the same appearance. A peacock appears and delivers this message by screaming. Both of them have a peacock, and both of them end up screaming. So it's not as if Richard has given up that kind of control and sense of using symbols and internal structures to just write a charming book for children. And I was kind of I enjoyed that because, of course, After the Facts is one of my favorite poems, and so who forgets a peacock?
One of mine too, mainly, or also because it's about Hölderlin and the time of his life when he was only going by the name Scardinelli.
Right.
And he was translating the classics into a very peculiar German. And he's also known for that. So the whole correspondence with this woman who is so fond of the peacocks and believes that one of those peacocks is making a pass at her, believes that she was in the presence of Hölderlin and is writing to his doctor, one of his doctors, about it. So it's quite different. And I would not say that a progressive education is for children. It's for adults.
No.
Remember childhood.
No, I don't think of it as a child's book either. But it sort of adjusts the notion of what we would expect from a meaningful dramatic monologue or a persona, where one, where the poet has adopted the voice of a child, however precocious and filled with language, but it's not something other than a mask, because it still is more engaged in the poem than it is in just, like, I don't know if you remember, do you remember Art Linkletter, where we used to have children on and interview them and make them say funny things? It's not like that. It's got more that it wants to do. Let me see what else there is. One of the things that we have here also is one of the things that Richard has said in one of his art interviews about self-expression, that that's not really about him, but it's about the poem. I don't know what I guess at this point now we can open this up to other people who have questions, who want to join in on this about personas, about the book, and see where we are. We were considering is one, is this different, or is this relatively the same as other books by Richard Howard? Is this a break, or is this a continuation?
I think mostly a continuation, because he's always been one of the notable users of monologue and dialogue, using various voices, and this is certainly a tour de force of that. My favorite poem is Denny Lee Explains in this, because you get such a completely different turn. Yeah, we can turn that off. Let's see. But that the idea of Peter Pan not being written for children, there was a children's classics before it was a children's book, shows the self-awareness. Of course, he's aware of this, but using these children, it's more like Charlie Brown, the Schultz idea of children, where they're really speaking for adult perspectives. But and the whole issue that opens that poem is the whole question: people, boys and girls, rather than ladies and gentlemen. I think that's wonderfully put together.
The one with Peter Pan is a thank you letter and beyond. So.
No, he's talking about how the other teacher is reading Peter Pan to them, and he's taking the different viewpoint.
Right.
Which is why I like it. It's an antithesis piece.
I had muted myself when I was talking. Okay, Mike, did you find that different from his other work in some sense, or was it the same?
I was saying that it was similar, in that that he's always used voices and monologue and dialogue. This was just a particularly good version of that.
Okay.
I would say formally it's the same in that they're all letters, they're all epistolary. And that's very much the case in a great deal of Richard Howard's poetry. The one I read before the excerpts poem in A Progressive Education is one of those few poems in which there's no identifiable speaker, and where one supposes this is the voice of Richard Howard at 72 years old. And of course, he's not talking about himself except through his understanding of the universe and the use of words about it.
Okay, sorry. One of the things you discussed in your questions was the notion of received forms and how forms work. And here these work primarily as a kind of form that's at least once or twice removed from the reader. We're just seeing a different mind to explain itself to a second mind, and then we're permitted an opportunity to think about what that conversation is, as opposed to actually being engaged with it. I was wondering about some of his other work that way, that the notion of correspondence, the notion of gossip, the notion of all of these kinds of things where we have a sense that we're overhearing something on purpose, that he's presented those things to his readers that way, so that we're not really looking at the thing itself, but something discussing the thing itself, which is kind of a peripheral focus.
As I said, they're all letters. So the kids are writing to their principal, they're writing to two of their teachers, and they do get responses toward the end of the book. And in that way, it's very much like an interchanging, even when they're one-sided, that go on throughout the work.
Okay, well, let's talk about forms in a more abstract sense, not just because, many of the forms we're working with, we're reading here are kinds of literary forms, but they're also kinds of physical forms. They go back and forth. Can you see the poem I've posted, like most revelations? which was the title poem of Like Most Revelations, where he talks about, the poem talks about rapture, it talks about lack of limits, it moves through apprehensions, and then says that seems to be the mortal process of continuing is the movement that creates form, the continuing on. I'm looking for a comment on that.
People.
Okay. Leslie, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. What do you think about forms here?
I don't have much of a feeling about forms. I had a couple of other observations, but I don't want to derail you guys. And I'm interested to hear what you have to say, but I don't really have anything to add to that right now.
What is it that you would want to add?
Well, there's two separate things that really struck me. One is how these letters are written collectively, and yet they have such a strong, intact voice. I don't know if that may have something to do with form. And I'm intrigued by that. It's hard for me to imagine they're written by a bunch of kids, but I'm willing to go there because it's so compelling and lovable. And the other thing that occurs to me, especially in light of a comment Rika made earlier about, or both of you, about them being children, there are places where they are philosophers, and that just delighted me. Every once in a while, they just come out with a zinger that is so brilliantly creative and maybe right. Like, just for an example, maybe our own parents will eat us sooner or later. Maybe they've eaten us already, and the rest of our lives is just the process. That's going back to the dragon poem. That kind of thing is brilliant to me.
And isn't that also very typical of Richard Howard's work, where you're working within one context, and then all of a sudden one of these wonderful witty bon mots appear, and he says something absolutely charming and entertaining, and then it goes on to return to to the form of the poem. We were reading. I was reading one the other day. I had to read out loud in my carpool, which was, when you're 20, the poet is always right, but when you're 60, the doctor is never wrong. Those wonderful little aphorisms that just sort of appear.
But I would say on the topic of mothers eating their fathers, I'd like to read you the beginning of a poem called Decades. It's in Fellow Feelings. It's for Hart Crane, who was also from Cleveland. Crane's Canary Cottage. I have turned 4, and the tablecloth between my mother and me, my father opposite, of course, invites pollution of its pure canary note by a nest of shiny knives and glasses, not for fingering. This is my first meal out, and I must behave on my father's sharp orders and yours, your father's. It is their bill of fare we pay for, and who knew how much it cost that April evening as we ate. My mother ate my father, her leftovers mine till now. I failed like yours, your father, to defend myself against the opposite sex. My own that night the news came. It goes on with fish, but a bit farther down, addressing Hart Crane, dear Hart, our mothers ate our fathers. What do we eat but each other? A bit farther, I love our problem. It becomes our solution. Unbecoming, it revolves. I was 4, you drowned. Now you remember me. I think that also illustrates something Don was saying about reversal of things, and it becomes our solution. Unbecoming, it dissolves. And that also, it doesn't look forward, but it's used in a way in that poem about elementary principles at 72, where the water is dissolving and can't be held. And when you consider that this is a poem by Hart Crane, about Hart Crane, you can see how the, I don't want to call them themes, but human themes are reach across the work. And the business about mothers and fathers eating their children is mythological, as we know, but it's also constant, or it goes through the work. And so there are relationships being described, relationships in families being described, that I think a lot of people identify with.
I also think one of his gifts as a poet is to be, as he suggested in his poem about William James, is that the work of the true master is never direct, it's never apparent, but it's almost overlooked. So that as we go through poems, which we seem like we're thinking about one thing, we seem like we're seeing something, we see something else. It changes into something else. One of the things you had wanted to discuss was the giant on giant killing, which starts as an ekphrastic poem about Donatello's David, and then goes through the whole process from the point of view of Goliath and a person falling in love, a person being engaged in a very complicated erotic relationship with his own death. And at the same time, it never varies from being an absolutely brilliant ekphrastic poem about a specific piece of art. So often in his work that, that's what you see is, here's a person who is presenting us genuinely complicated things. I think my mother's eating me. I think I'm being devoured by my parents. I'm devouring my parents. I think I'm dying. I can't deal with the way sex is working. I feel lost. These are themes which in the hands of lesser poets come across as kind of rude and charmless, desperate poems. But here, he allows us to draw it out. He allows us an opportunity to engage peripherally and almost safely, I think, in some ways. There's Donatello's David. Did that show up on the screen?
Yes.
Oh, good, thanks.
Yes.
All right, let me see if I can get rid of it now. All right, where am I? Okay, here now. I'll come back. Good. I'm here. Okay.
I think in the homage to Donatello's David and the giant on giant killing, there's also a great deal of attention to words that comes across even more in these precocious children grabbing onto every vocabulary word. But the beginning of the giant on giant killing explains what the word means, what Goliath means
Yes.
in Assyrian, and then later on, I guess, in Hebrew.
Right.
So I think this is related to Richard Howard being an extraordinary translator. having brought us, I'm the one who now says 250 books because it's been 150 for many years. And I was just even estimating a couple of books a year for X number of years. So the other poem I was considering excerpting and reading was 5 Communications, which is about a device that is supposed to enable owners to understand the language of their dogs. So I also asked the question about the titles of his books, but it's the same with the titles of so many of the poems, except in that case it might be called 5 Miscommunications. That's my reading on it. And the first part is called something with strayed in it. So that this is where I think you don't notice, unless you read lots of Richard Howard's poems, how comedic he is just by using words.
Yeah, certainly even the notion of the title of this is a progressive education is a play on words with what we used to regard as progressive education at that time. That was the term for it. But it also has that sense of this is an education of building experiences. You know, it's progressing, it's growing that way. The same as you said, many of his other titles. They're almost jokes, almost puns within themselves. That misgivings. That fellow feelings, 2-part inventions, where he implies that he's both being historical and also inventing things, and also using the same sense of Bach, that he's writing these things in response, left hand to right hand. Which brings us back to I think what I thought was one of your most insightful questions in your series of questions. Are these poems tragic? When you look at his 17 volumes of poetry, we look at them. Do we regard him as a tragic poet? Do we regard him as a comedic poet, that things are coming out well in the end? Are these cheerful? Are they not, cheery, but are they optimistic? Or certainly there's no dearth of pessimistic poets, of our age. So I'll hold off and see what your opinion is on this one.
I would love to hear other people's opinions on this, because it sounds like we have people there who really know his work.
Okay. Do you want me to call you by name, or do you just want to start talking?
I'll just chime in, and this is Leslie, and I don't know his work as well as I would like, but I think that there is a non-comedic undertow to much of this book, even though it tickles you at every page. I like another passage that I particularly was struck by is all science a history of death. Maybe we'll learn in 7th grade that no fate is worse than death after all, and that life will be our fate. And I think there's that seems typical of something that's tugging under a lot of these poems, even though some of their other concerns are more frivolous. So that grounds this book for me in something away from the comedy that's so characteristic of so many of the poems.
You think comedy as in terms of funny, or comedy in terms of the more Grecian, if things are going to at the end, are things going to be better, or at the end
or marriage at the end?
Yeah,
I'm going Grecian on this one.
You're going Grecian. You think there's going to be a marriage or a tragedy?
It's not. I'm not thinking of funny. I'm thinking of the possibility of a not happy ending is lurking throughout the book. Does that make sense?
You're breaking up a little. What else? Mike, what's your opinion on this one?
Well, I think the age of the speakers of the children is perfect because them, sex is something they don't quite understand and they even fear, but reading it, you realize that in a few years their attitudes are completely going to reverse. So that's some of the humor. But they, if there's a richness, if you were to write merely about sex as being wonderful and porn, it's a, you only get to. On the other hand, there's that recent Irish novel from a woman's point of view where sex is nothing but violence and assault. So this manages to have a certain humor. The children are masks, which allow them to say things that could be sound universally pompous. Dave's not here, but. I think that's. I mentioned Charlie Brown before. I think there's something of that going on.
Well, I just to be kind of contrarian, I'm trying to envision these children in 10 years or 15 years, and I don't see them as being completely that adjusted, that suddenly they're going to grow out of it. They're going to, they're going to be, captain of the football team and those sort of things. These are people that I think are going to deal with these issues because we only speak of sex pretty much now when it's over. We don't speak of it as being the great mystery that it was, or the great issue. We kind of have it closed into whatever we've developed it to. But
when you say we, you're speaking from an adult perspective. These
as an adult, yeah,
are prepubescent, and to them, it is a mystery. It remains a mystery. They will not be the same people after they change their. There's going to be a metamorphosis here, and they're going to see things differently.
It's still. You don't think it's still going to be a mystery?
Well, it's still a mystery to me sometimes, but I mean, it's.
Yeah, I'm kind of more with the kids on this one. I'm looking at that. Leslie, where are you on this one?
Well, I hope my mic is working. It keeps going off.
It's working great, yeah.
Now it is. It went off when I was in the middle of my last sentence, but I think I envision these kids when they get older that there will be new mysteries. That as one mystery is solved, they'll just keep having new ones, and sex will offer them another layer or 2 or 20 of mystery.
Rika, where are you?
I'm here, and I'm thinking on this whole, the kids are wonderfully curious, and that's something that many adults are not. And also that they really learn how to read, and that Miss Husband basically sends them into the stacks of the public library, I believe. She starts off with the library, and also go there and find out about the life or lives of an author.
And is it?
The author of Alice in Wonderland, that he had a double identity. And one of them didn't like dogs. There's such richness of detail.
Hold on one second. Somebody's breathing. Could you mute yourself, please? I'd rather you mute yourself than stop breathing. Okay.
There's so much wonderful detail about the speakers and the writers in this poem as in all the others. And we learn about Richard Howard's viewpoint. I think that's the voice that comes through all the other voices in the letters as he reads back and as he is reading back into the events of his childhood, though he's always making things up. So I don't know if the business with the peacock ever happened, but I don't really care because it is invented so wonderfully that it makes no difference if it really happened or not. That's also, to me, one of the things that make me enjoy the poetry so much. That I don't have to go into the stacks, but if I go into the stacks, I learn even more. And I think that's what he's doing as a teacher as well as a poet. He's trying to get you to read backwards and not just to stay with your peers in your reading. Your contemporaries.
Would someone say something? I think there's also that point about that from Wildflowers, where Oscar Wilde says, "You need a poet needs a mask in order to tell the truth." And I think for many of these things, the poems here, it's a wonderful mask that allows a person to say things like, sex will always be mysterious. It would be really much better if we could have children without having DSI. And you know, that, you know, we don't quite grasp why people do things. They just, you know, that there's a certain amount of violence which is a part of just this, you know, this one gorgeous moment. Here's a white peacock on a pierced arrow, suddenly destroyed in his screaming moment of pure childish violence. I mean, there's, you know, it's misunderstanding. It's to whatever end that the motivation is, but the reality remains. Violence will destroy a great amount of beautiful things. It will destroy bodies. It will, you know, and we also have the sense with these children that they too will not necessarily be destroyed, but they won't be able to stay children. They're very temporary. They're very fragile. You know? So.
I'd like to know if other people thought of them as fragile. I did not think of them as fragile. I thought it was so real that they have problems with each other. And it's like the mother and the father eating their children. That it's true. And it's also true that kids have disagreements and they fight, and here they even write to someone who I think he's now a second grader or he's moved. His name is Eddie Cass. They want Eddie to resolve something that they themselves can't. As all of them children.
Leslie, where are you? Are you still on?
I'm still here. I think one of the things, I'm not sure, I agree that they're fragile and they're not. One thing that interests me is how the boundary between 6th grade and 7th grade is so enormous. And they're so lodged in their 6th gradedness, and they're very aware that a lot of things will change will probably change in 7th grade. And there's something very endearing about that. It's maybe the way kids are in their sense of time. Oops, am I still here?
Yes, you're still here. We see you.
Oh, okay, because my screen just did weird things. Anyway, the kids are sort of in the present all the time, and for all their precociousness, they are so in 6th grade. And who knows what's going to happen in 7th grade? They don't.
Well, 6th grade, having taught 6th grade, 6th grade is one that I tell parents, if at the end of the year your child is still alive and the report card says goes to 7th grade, that's as good as you can hope for that year. Okay, we're coming very close to the end of our time. Rika, do you want to say something else in closing? We've got.
Well, I'll just say that I think a progressive education, despite the fact that there are the masks of all the children, differs from the other books in being really clearly autobiographical. And whatever is revealed by the other books, the poems are several measures away from that. And in the poem for Hart Crane, he does say that he's 4. And this is the next instance of really talking about himself in a way that he does not usually do. And I think that's really part of what's so enjoyable about it.
And the other thing I suppose that's very enjoyable about it, not to, is that it, unlike many of the other books, you could approach these with just mere experience and not a lot of knowledge and information. For instance, in talking cure or fellow feelings or misgivings or any of them, you kind of have to bring a fair amount of information to really engage with the poems. These you can just readily engage with, and I think that's one of its best features. Well, Rika, we want to thank you very much for your first off for your patience with this technology. In spite of our best efforts, it went wild. I want to thank you a lot for your preparation and your discussion. Of course, we want to thank Richard Howard for his work to let us provide an hour's worth of discussion for the world in the ether. So thank you very much. We hope people will put this up where the slides will be up, where we can find your work on Amazon. Which I've read your work and I would love to discuss that some. It's wonderful. And thank you. And if you want to say anything to anyone else, this is your chance.
Well, I know from the list of people that Richard Howard is listening, so he's very pleased. And I also see below that the session is...
Okay. Well, thank everybody for participating. We'll look forward to next month. Hopefully we'll be even smoother than this month, and we'll see you then.